Hi everybody, thank you, Al, dearest. Just for the record, I'm not leaving London yet. But I did promise myself we wouldn't use the dreaded B word on this panel, so we're going to try and avoid speaking about Brexit. We've all clearly had enough. Can I introduce my panel? To my left is Richard Mumford, an aviation lawyer. He is currently chairman of BACA, the Charter Association. So he'll be giving us some insight on the regulatory side of Charter. Simon Williams is down at the end. Simon is Director of Civil Aviation at the Isle of Man Aviation Authority and is going to give us some insight and thoughts on how the regulators can respond and adapt and help. Isn't that right, Simon? And in the middle then we have Juergen Weise, who is Chairman of the European Business Aviation Association. So our topic that we were given was basically dealing with the lawmakers. And I can tell you, as a lawyer, dealing with lawmakers is no easy feat. But in the context of aviation, and certainly in the context of everything that's been talked about today, the legal and regulatory side is obviously crucial, and getting it right is crucial. We have seen it time and again where they didn't get it right, and it has caused us a lot of problems on application of regulation. One of the questions I was going to start the panel with, and maybe this one is for you, Richard, is in terms of dealing with the lawmakers, isn't it more a case in aviation that we don't deal with the lawmakers, that we bring it back in-house, into industry, get it right, and then present the solution?
Yes, is the short answer to that, but it's quite a tricky thing to do. I mean, I think quite a few people have had their eyebrows raised today at the idea of there being 150 different aircraft under development. The chances of more than a tiny handful of those getting certified and being commercially successful are pretty slim. So, you know, from our point of view, we heard lots of different people approaching lots of different problems and market issues in different ways. But what we're not getting is leadership from the regulators. In our part of the market, sometimes known as the Wild West of air charter broking, it's one of the few unregulated areas of aviation. And attempts to engage with regulators, even in that sort of relatively simple part of the market, has been tricky. And what we always advise people to do is to go to regulators with solutions and ask yourselves what it is we want the market to look like. What it is that we think is needed, what infrastructure is needed to make that work, and how we're going to do it, and how we're going to make the regulators' lives easy so that they can tick their box and certify an aircraft or agree a certain working practice or approach to the market. And that sounds quite simple, but actually bringing all of that together, if you've got 150 disparate approaches, bringing that all together into one place is a very difficult thing to do. But if we are going to make progress, and one of the things that trouble me slightly with the air charter broking market is the vast amounts of investment that have been put into disrupting that market over the last 5-10 years, very little of which has been able to actually disrupt the market and change it in any significant way. Whether we might see the same problem here, and whether we need some leadership from the market. In order for the markets and the regulators to provide us with that leadership, we need to give them the building blocks with which to do so.
I think it's probably a good one to lead into you, Juergen. We spoke earlier, and certainly I think because of everybody in the room is familiar with aviation, we do embrace change and we do embrace innovation. But aren't we in danger of creating the Uber-type approach to flying? And you know, the problems that will come from that. What's your view?
Well, first of all, I would like to state when we did an EBAA, a survey of 2,000 millennials within Europe or across Europe, 59% of them said that this new method of air transport will drastically change our lives. So, and as you talk about the Uberization of aviation, or let's say of the air taxi business, short range aviation, I think we're now coming to a totally different approach on how to deal with stakeholders. Traditionally at an association, European association, we were talking to regulators at the European level, maybe even at the global level, ICAO, and then we go down down to the national authorities. But now we are talking about a totally different concept. I mean, I personally believe that the topic of certification and technology, we will master that in timeframes which were indicated earlier today. The concept of implementing such a transportation system, especially on really short hops, is a really interesting one, because then you'd start talking to, like today, if you want to land your helicopter somewhere, you have to talk to the landlord or to the city council or to other people from more local and regional governments who have no idea about aviation, and that's a total different ballgame, I guess, which we haven't done yet as an association. NBA, for example, has done that with airport topics, but we haven't done that. And then we come into other topics of like, who is the actual operator? Is it a franchise system? Who is actually responsible and for this operation? Who gets the license for that operation? All these kinds of things are very interesting. While I embrace these visions, I'm a fascinated fan of new technology. And we heard earlier today, let's move in that paradox between practical application and vision. So I think we have to sometimes take a look at where do we have to go now as an industry, a combined effort to accompany all that development with a proper approach to regulators and responsible politicians at the different levels.
Responsible politicians. In the wrong country for that one. Simon, one for you then. Can I mean, from a regulator's point of view, we bring you all of these new innovative aircraft. What are the kind of things you look for, or how are you going to oversee the safety of the operation of these aircraft?
I think the starting point really is to say the reason I'm here is because I'm here to listen and learn. My passion as a safety regulator, albeit in a internationally compliant third world registry type context, my passion for aviation and safety regulation is one of working in safety partnership. Because to be frank, my experience both when I was working in industry, previously when I was working at the United Kingdom Civil Aviation Authority, was that a lot of the expertise on a lot of the topics, and I guess no more so than what we're talking about today, a lot of the expertise actually sits within industry. So what worries me most as a safety regulator is that the safety regulatory bodies might be making decisions in splendid isolation based on not necessarily all of the facts. And so there is the challenge for us as safety regulators to move with the times. Now, together with test pilots, very clever engineers, and a whole host of people contributing to making commercial aviation a safe environment that it is, I think there is a place for regulation. But for someone with my approach to it, the way I think about this, it's got to be proportionate, it's got to be responsive, it's got to be balanced, it's got to be informed. And so that's where I do take heart from some of the things I've heard today from some of the other panels about, you know, the response they've had from the EASA in some instances and from the FAA. As regulators, we have to listen, we have to respond, and we have to be changing with the times. I'm not looking for my life to be made easy, I promise you. I don't know whether I'm the fifth paradox, and we had 4 this morning, and so, you know, a forward-leading, imaginative regulator who actually wants aviation to really flourish. But if you were a fly on the wall in the organisation that I'm responsible for, you would hear me every day challenge my fellow regulators that report to me to say, I want you to use your imagination. Every day you come to work, I want you to be free-range chickens. I'm not interested in battery hens, okay? That might seem really bizarre, but we're highly ICAO compliant. So one of my first acts was to introduce ICAO Annex 6, Part 2, Section 3. So the full regulatory suite for large aircraft, okay? But there's ways of achieving high standards in partnership with industry that allow industry just to get on, to flourish safely and efficiently without making a bureaucratic nightmare. So what am I looking for, to come to your question? Well, I'm looking for people to have really thought about what it is they're doing. to think about the technology, to think about how they're going to operate it. Because ultimately, the central tenet of commercial aviation, if we're going to talk about that, is protection of the fare-paying passenger. So if I buy a ticket to fly from wherever it is to wherever it is, I'm not going to use London to Europe because that might not work very well in a few days' time. But if I'm going to fly from A to B, I need to have a reasonable expectation that I'm going to get there safely and efficiently. And so there is a place for a regulator, but I would always hope that my fellow regulators are responsive, imaginative, and move with the times.
Richard, I think we need to touch on the subject. It's a very thorny and very topical subject at the moment, which is that of grey charter. It's always been a thorny subject, but even more so recently. Surely there's a risk with this Uber of the air. I mean, when we were talking about it earlier, you get into an Uber because it's cheaper. Do you ask him for his driving license? Do you ask him for a copy of his insurance? No, you don't. You just assume it's all been taken care of. And there is a perception of the public that our industry is equally very highly regulated. But we all know there are those of them out there who offer grey charter. And it has massive, as we can see, it has massive legal and certainly insurance connotations. What can you do in BACA to help that? How can you help these people with these great ideas make sure they don't fall foul of similar issues?
Well, the thing we crave at BACA above all else in terms of the boundaries between commercial and private operations is clarity. And we've seen quite a lot of changes in the market and in regulation over the last few years. One of which is quite close to my heart is the commercialisation of cost sharing, for example. And we've also seen the introduction of set-ops, and we've seen a number of other changes that have the potential to greatly increase not only the aircraft types, but the flight pairs. We've seen what are described as innovative models of day leasing structures and all sorts of things that are designed to get around the need for a commercial AOC. And from our point of view, and we would say this, wouldn't we, because we represent the commercial market, but if you're sticking a flying member of the public on an aircraft, that aircraft ought to be maintained to commercial standards. And so every time we introduce a new innovation to the market, we need to do that in a structured way that maintains that clarity and protects the flying customers from those boundaries between what is safe and what isn't. And this needn't really affect anything that's been said today, provided the market is approached in the right way. And that's why I think, and what I said at the start, we need a little bit more clarity from the regulators as to where this is going. I mean, it's all very well we see pictures of innovative airport structures and runways in the middle of towns and all that sort of thing. But realistically, there's an awful lot that has to be decided before any of that's going to happen, and any of that's going to be accepted, and any of that's going to lead to safe flight for members of the public. And so, really, above all else, we would countenance some caution in the way that we approach that market.
Simon, it's probably one for you. Aren't we doing it wrong, though? I mean, the whole concept of the regulators care about the fare-paying passengers, but if you're not paying any money, then do whatever you like. Isn't it that we need to turn that on its head, get rid of this cost-sharing concept, which has been so abused over time, and come at it in a different way? Is that the change that's needed?
Maybe that's exactly the point. I mean, I think, for a long time we've all been wrestling with this issue of, I call them illegal charters, not grey, because they're either legal or not, but the problem is that complex national regulations allow for different interpretations, and then we've got very clever people that will put a spin on that. But actually, that's exactly what we're doing right now in the Isle of Man. It's where I'm at, so it's not a sales pitch, I promise you, but we have just repatriated the legislative process from the United Kingdom, and guess what? We are completely rewriting our air navigation order, because what we're trying to get our heads around for the benefit of the private stroke corporate market, which is who we serve, is quite old legacy UK legislation that was written for a time, and it may or may not have served a purpose, but the point is that things have moved on. So our challenge now is to completely rewrite our legislative suite, and we're going to get rid of aerial work. We're going to try and redefine certain things to make it clearer and more straightforward. Now, herein lies the exact challenge. If anyone's ever tried writing a law or a regulation, I suppose the lawyers here probably would understand what I'm getting at here. To write a law about something that is focused on safety is a really neat trick. I'm not trying to make it more difficult than it is, but actually, we might say, well, what's the intended outcome? What are we trying to achieve? Okay, well, we know what that is, right? So let's just write that. And then someone will say, well, hang on a second, have we thought about this? And so I suppose what I'm trying to say is it's not that straightforward. I'm not trying to make an excuse, because I've got to get it right for the market that I'm accountable for. And maybe it is time to revisit the rules and redefine them to give the clarity that I think everyone needs.
Sure.
The issue, I guess, for you, though, is that someone needs to do a lot of deep thinking about this market and the way it's going to develop. And you'll forgive me saying this, but you must have limited resource with which to do that deep thinking. That deep thinking needs to take place across the widest possible stage, doesn't it? And do you, as a regulator, feel that kind of cohesion across regulators generally in the way they address this market and these developments?
The reason why I work in the market that I do is because those that know me know that I'm a passionate advocate about business aviation. So business aviation is a very specific market. It's a very passionate market. It's got a very broad church of people that are doing all sorts of activities within that. So connecting with that is vital. That's one of the reasons why I'm here, to listen and learn, to be honest with you. And probably, if I get out of here without being tarred and feathered, I'll be really pleased. But as we're developing our legislation going forwards, then you better believe that we'll be going into consultation about this, and I will be sharing it with people to get the industry feedback. Because it's only by working, this is something that is really close to my heart, both personally and professionally, it's only by working in safety partnership with the industry that I think we stand a chance as a team of getting where we want to. I want safe, efficient operations. Business aviation wants exactly the same thing, and I also want you guys to be profitable. I can't really influence that too much, but I want you guys to succeed.
Can I have one for you, Juergen? It's actually been summarised very succinctly. One of the big issues we have is the application of regulation. I mean, even within EASA, it is applied differently by different national authorities. And then you have EASA versus FAA, and then you have EASA versus the Chinese form of EASA, and then the Saudi and the Dubai form. What can you do as the promoter of business aviation to help with that? Because there's a massive cost associated with it. It's moving aircraft from one to another is very, very expensive, for one.
Well, first of all, we are about to talk to EASA about a further clarification of commercial and non-commercial. That's one thing to make clear. We get away out of this area of illegal charter. And then in our conversations with EASA, we flag every time we have a meeting that inconsistency in application of the set standard through EASA in those different member countries. And to be honest, we have flags of convenience in Europe and even within EASA jurisdiction. And that is something that should not be a desirable state for EASA, and they know that, and they unfortunately tell us every time they lack the capacity. So like you only have a limited capacity, they also have it. Our desire and our wish towards EASA, for example, is, and also some of the national authorities, is to direct more of their resources to the actual hotspots. First of all, standardization absolutely has to be paramount, but also direct the resources you have away from over-auditing, I would love to say, existing AOC operators who are safe, into the more hotspots we have now, into coming up with sensible, proportionate regulation for certification of these new type of propulsion and transportation systems, but also how to make sure the operation can then be a sound and robust operation which is safe for the public, but also transparent for the public.
But don't we then need a working group? Because, you know, this is creating a new category. And us applying non-commercial rules to this category wouldn't work at all. You know,
I agree, and this week we'll have at EBAA we'll have our membership assembly, and we'll also listen to the members, and I think one of the topics will certainly be we need a working group on this future of flight to work together as an industry and to prepare the ground further on. Right.
It may surprise you. I mean, I spend a lot of my time lobbying other lawmakers. So, you know, the Isle of Man, the starting point is that we're as highly ICAO compliant as we can be. I totally support what Juergen's just said about standardisation across Europe, and that's why we spent a lot of time working with the SAFA and SACA ramp inspectors. Because what might be a finding in one country turns out to be something different in another country. So we take, as a regulatory body, we take that sort of thing seriously, because I don't want my business aviation operator, say, I don't know, in the south of France or in Germany or wherever it happens to be struggling with a ramp inspection when that doesn't fit in with what the ramp inspection should be looking at. And so we do go back to those regulatory authorities as our bid to try and lobby for standardisation. It's really, really important. So our starting point, without wishing to sound too robotic about it, is, right, what does ICAO say? And we try and cascade it down from ICAO, but then we try and import best practice from Europe and the UK. But lobbying on standardisation is absolutely vital for industry, because you can't have contradictory or competing regulatory oversight. It's inefficient, it's wasteful, and potentially it runs the risk of perhaps eroding safety standards.
One for you, Richard. Commercial registries will lead to the end of the individual country-linked CAA. This is a bit political. Country-linked CAA departments, as they're not versatile and innovative enough, Simon. Do you agree, Richard? Fifth paradox.
I suppose the answer is they could. I don't know enough about it to know whether the systems and controls you'd have to put in place to control those commercial registries would effectively make them like CAA departments anyway, I suspect. I think that just links back to the same point, doesn't it? That we need to look as broadly as possible at the market. The aviation is a global market. Aircraft fly across borders. And so as soon as you create competing or different standards in different parts of the world, you create risk. And so the more standardized you can make it, the better it is. And you know, the more then you can pool your limited resources and recruit some really good people who understand the market to make those decisions and to do the research and thinking that needs to be done to make sure the market operates safely and effectively. All the time you splinter that out and have lots of different people employed to do the same thing in different places, you dilute that. So some form of sort of broader approach has got to be better.
So Juergen, on the UAM market in particular, the topic of the conference here, is it to take your point on it, it's more of a local issue. You know, it's less international and it's more local. Can you see the lawmakers and the stakeholders engaging with the OEMs, with the leading people in industry? Do you think that that's something that needs to happen together with the city councils? I mean, what's the point in building these things if the Green Brigade prevent them flying?
I think that, first of all, certification, of course, is an overall topic which must be harmonized between at the state level, between FAA, EASA, and all the others involved. But then coming to the more operational part is exactly that. Now we're dealing with maybe the London City Council who says, no, no way, we can only imagine the 20-seater Air E-bus flying over our city from here to there, like the Uber pool. But we will never allow in our green city the 500 personal air vehicles. That's something where we also have to educate at the different levels about the economic impact. Okay, like earlier today we saw, okay, it's a time saver. The 2 to 4 seaters were labeled as more or less a time saver. Then it's a little bit difficult to really make it perfectly clear to a city council that this time saving, and we are using that also for business aviation in general all the time. Time saved is actual time then hopefully used for doing business somewhere. Well, it's a difficult topic. I think the more acceptable vehicles might be the larger ones, maybe the 9 to 20 seaters for some of these cities where they say, okay, this actually helps as a means of mass transport, bridge those or fly over those traffic jams. But if I take that question, regulation needs to be less consistent. I think the regulation in general, certification must be consistent, absolutely. And then we have to have a consistent message coming out through our industry, through associations, but also through really proactive regulators and other associations, have a consistent message of what we are trying to achieve here. And it's not only sustainability, because I think if we take the London inner city zone, sustainability is already given. Zero emission is a license to operate any vehicle. So that's probably not enough. So we have to come up with a consistent message about the use cases and the actual what we do for the economy and for the society. Let's take society. What about flying organs with these vehicles? What about having medical evacuations with these vehicles? All these things we have to leverage on to make sure the people at the local level understand that this is also for the benefit of the larger society.
I think that's a general issue in business aviation anyway, isn't it? I mean, it's our message, and you know, the luxury fat cats flying around in their own aircraft is you know, whilst it's true of some, it is certainly not true of the entire industry. But I mean, from that point though, and given the problems we have in business aviation when dealing with regulators who are frankly too busy dealing with the airlines and too busy dealing with the airline industry, the commercial aircraft industry, isn't it time we even rethink that and say, well, let's have a separate category of, a bit like what you've done, Simon, in the Isle of Man, is we specialise in business aviation. You do commercial as well, but it was more starting with business aviation. Shouldn't we be doing that with...
We don't do commercial aviation.
Not commercial transit, sorry. But in terms of this particular market, isn't it the case that these need their own regulators, that these type of aircraft need a different system?
Well, I think I'm not going to be critical of anyone really. I suppose we are where we are, but I mean, it's something that I saw at UKCAA and I'm very passionate about, is that business aviation is a huge industry. It contributes so much in terms of jobs and revenues and you know, so much to the economy that it warrants a significant effort. There's a limit to what I can influence, but where I found that, say, there's some differences between what EASA are currently doing, and I'm not being critical of them, in terms of how they've rolled regulations out with regards to business aviation, that then has left European NAAs struggling because they don't have the resource. We've gone to them, and I've met with virtually all of them now, and we're setting up letters of understanding with the European NAAs, and the whole idea is to try and eliminate some of the bureaucracy and the duplicated oversight. We say, look, this is what we do. We're a highly regulated industry. We're a highly compliant state of registry. So come and look at how we work with business aviation. If you're satisfied with our approach, then allow us to carry out that regulatory oversight on your behalf. So we're now doing that for the UK, we're now doing that for Germany, we're working with FOCA, we're now doing that with Poland. And so it's what I mean about trying to use imagination. Are some of these large NAAs going to suddenly have a spike in resources and funding such that business aviation gets the resource in terms of oversight that it deserves? I wish that was the case. I think the reality is that probably won't happen, certainly in the foreseeable future. So within the sphere of my influence, I'm trying to find innovative ways around it to allow you guys just to get on with business.
One of the ones I wanted to throw out there, and just for the record, this is my idea before any of you start stealing it. Listening to Sandra earlier talking about blockchain, and I was thinking, you know, where that we definitely need that is aircraft records, because there have been efforts over the years on digitization of aircraft records and get them away from the cardboard boxes and the hangars and actually get them on stream. And the biggest block in it was the regulators, getting the regulators to accept digitised versions of originals. What, in your view, is the block with the regulators? What do you find most frustrating? Simon.
I'd like to see things evolve a little quicker, I think, to be honest with you. I mean, when I arrived, the last two pieces of paper that we used to push around in my organisation were a certificate of airworthiness and a certificate of registration. And I said, well, why do we do that? Well, ICAO says that it's got to be the original. Yeah, but it doesn't say it's got to be on paper, does it? Okay. So now we do it digitally. And so, you know, that's a small example, but these things are all achievable. And I think, you know, in part it's a mindset. It's a use of imagination that can be applied. I think regulators, perhaps by nature, are cautious, but by working appropriately in safety partnership, I think industry can play a large role in constructively and appropriately keep lobbying the regulators to say, come on, this is our safety mitigation, this is how we're operating, we've thought about the risks, work with us, and let's go digital because that's the way the world is now. It's frustrating, I get frustrated, but I'm not going to quit on it.
Not yet.
Nope.
The regulatory priority, this is a good question. Propulsion maintenance, pilot regs training, take your pick. Which is the priority, Juergen? And shouldn't ICAO lead this? Or should Juergen lead this?
Well, I think, should ICAO lead this? Yes, in the end, it has to be at ICAO level, because if we look at the regulatory structure worldwide, at the ICAO level, this is the top level, and then it boils down, and otherwise you have to file for all the differences as a state. I think, but ICAO, well, is very slow because the regulatory bodies with so many participants are quite slow, and they have their regular timeframes when they actually do come out with new regulations. So it's certainly, well, on the propulsion. I don't know. I thought, let's say, if I read when I read CS23, ASA CS23, it's relatively open on the topic of propulsion, and also on the topic of storage of energy. It actually talks about energy storage and no longer about fuel tanks and all these things. And pilot regulation might be something which is then dependent on what the industry can come up in terms of easy fly-by-wire, things like that. Well,
Fly-by-wire is a good example, actually, of the industry-led response. But Richard, I guess it's back to your original point of this should be led by the industry, and we think it through. I mean, all of those things need to be thought through. Certification is the starting point, but the actual operation of these is where the liability and the risk and the safety comes in. I mean, it doesn't strike me as if this should be ICAO-led. It strikes me as it should be more lobby group-led. What's your view?
Yeah, I mean, just come back to the point I was making earlier. I think is that if you have lots of different people investing the same resource and looking at the same problem from a regulatory point of view, you're just wasting a lot of resource. So the more broadly it's looked at, and I'd pick up the point earlier about having local regulations and local politicians involved. London's not a good example for that at the moment, because we've got a mayor in London who's trying to curb rotary movements across the skies of London. So he's not up with the programme, I'm afraid. But, you know, the more we can invest in good quality thinking and resource across a broader platform, the easier it is to come up with the right answers to these things. Yes, the market should lead that process. But then are you going to bring your 150 different development companies together and get them to sit around in a room and come up with who's got the best ideas on which bits of their products and their development programs? No, you're not. So at some stage it has to be brought together, whether by people like Juergen or myself in terms of associations or in some other way. But I think probably both of our experience will be that you need to help the regulators along from time to time, and you have to help them by doing some of the work for them and presenting them with some deeply considered and sensible research and thinking that helps them, because they don't have that level of resource to do it.
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's the same topic. If someone comes to me with a problem, if I'm the boss, I want to see a solution. I don't want to see this person as being part of the problem. I say, what's your solution now? And we as the industry have to come together, as you said, in working groups and offer solutions. And I mean, finally, ultimately, of course, it has to end up at ICAO level to make sure these vehicles can be sold anywhere in the world and be operated there according to the same standards. But I agree that then the industry has to lead this, and some countries have actually had a leaning towards industry standards. Well, the question is, where is the different, or where's the boundary of having industry standards to where you actually need hard regulation? But that's something we also have to find out as an industry. So,
I know what the regulator priority for me is. It's safe, efficient aviation. The trick is a balanced portfolio of appropriate regulation across all of those. All I want is safe, efficient aviation, and the devil's in the detail as to how we get the balance right for maintaining those priorities. And the more stakeholders we have, the more arguments we have, and therein lies a challenge. Everyone's view is valid, of course, but the more people we discuss, the more everyone has a different view sometimes, and that's where it becomes like herding cats.
We need Sandra again. We need a blockchain. I need to wrap up. One last question for each of you. If you could change one thing with the lawmakers, if you had a wish list, what would be top of your wish list? Start with you, Richard.
Yeah, I sort of sold myself a bit early on that one, didn't I? Because, for me, it's the clarity of the boundary between commercial and private operations. And for me, that's become blurred over the last few years. And for this market to be developing in the way it is now, in those slightly uncertain conditions, isn't a great foundation and starting point. So I'd like to see that clarified. I'd like it to be extremely clear about when a member of the public can and cannot fly on a privately operated aircraft.
Absolutely.
Well, for me, it's take the resources and put them to the hotspots and go ahead with a risk-based approach on where you want to deploy the resources, and do not over-audit those operations which are already safe and have proven to be safe for many decades, and take away some of the audits like SAFA and all this, and use personnel towards writing the proper regulations or applying the proper regulations, then overseeing it for certification of this new technology, but also developing sound and robust operating concepts.
Appropriate standardisation internationally, and that's what I will always strive for. It should be a level playing field for everyone.
You heard it here. Simon's going to lead the way, FAA, the EASA. Well done, Simon. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to the panel.